How's it going, everybody? This is International Master Daniel Wrench. This is Chess.com, and this is going to be a wild and wacky weekend. Hope you're excited. Today we're going to bring you the next segment of the mating nets section of our Patterns Everyone Must Know video series. Sounds a little bit complex there, even just describing it, because we're in for a complex video. So again, we have already discussed basic tactical patterns, just from literally defining every possible tactical pattern, then moving on to how these tactical patterns exist and coordinate and really happen in practical games and are beyond the basics. Then we sort of we dove in here to the mating nets idea as patterns that exist around the king, and the way our pieces coordinate to create mating opportunities is obviously, goes without saying, is an important piece of knowledge, and you want to be aware of as many as possible. We've been trying to organize them in a type of fashion that hopefully will stick with you and become as quickly a part of your thought process as possible. I always feel like if I can find a way to organize the information and deliver knowledge in such a way that actually is applicable by my students, then I've done a good job, right? The mark of a good coach is not that you crack the whip and that they do exactly what you said to do, but that you hopefully improve somebody's ability to figure something out for themselves that they've never seen before. By giving them confidence and tools and knowledge of things that are similar, you're actually improving their critical thinking skills. And to me, that's what hopefully we've been able to do with these patterns that are likely becoming more familiar to you. And I hope we can do that again today. So the position you see today right here, we're talking about Greco's mate, first of all. And remember, a lot of these things have funny names that aren't the most important thing for you to remember. Of course, the most important thing being that you actually know how the pieces coordinate and you can find them in a real game. But this is going to be Greco's mate we're going to work on first, and then we're going to move on to Blackburn's mate. Then we're going to talk about some different patterns that some have names, some don't. But the major theme of this video here, Mating Nets 4, is I'm going to call it the weakened castled position. We talked about mating nets that specifically involve the knight, the bishop, the rook, and of course we're always using alts of pieces, but I tried to organize them in such a way that they would be easier for you to follow. Right now we're going to be looking at mating nets that involve a lot of the minor pieces at first, the coordinations of the minor pieces with Greco's and Blackburn's mate, but that's really not the theme of it. The theme of it, I think, is the weakened castled king, particularly the weakened fianchetto position, as we move on to the later patterns in this video. And then we'll kind of wrap it up and give you some other ones that I had trouble classifying under a particular pattern, but I thought they worked well in the progression that this particular lecture is going to take. So buckle up. You're in for a wild ride. I know you're pumped to be here, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And let's do this thing. As you know, it is white to play in this position. We're looking at it from white's perspective, and for those of you who are looking at this video for the first time, or let's say the series for the first time, then you need to go back and watch the others. But even for advanced players, this stuff is going to be pretty tough and a really good training exercise if you just want to sit there and run through this video with us. Even if you're an advanced or even almost master level player, you can try to solve every position, but make sure you're fast and that you try to pause the video every time you see a new position set up in front of you, because I'm not going to remind you to think every position. I'm just going to go ahead and move ahead, and hopefully you've thought about the position and tried to solve it for yourself, because that will make it a part of your thought process in a way that is more effective than just sitting there and letting me spoon feed you the information. So let's do this thing. White to play. White starts out with bishop to c4 check, a very forcing move. Obviously the king must go to h8. After knight to g5, we're threatening checkmate on h7. Of course, there are random, silly computer sacrifice checks, but the best move is, and the only really logical move, is h6, which prevents it, and white plays queen to g6, threatening checkmate on h7. Excuse me, this is Greco's mate. The idea here is that the only way to stop the mate on h7 is to capture the knight, and in doing so, we have exposed the open h file, allowing the queen to pop right back to h5 and deliver the goods, ending the game effectively. Again, this is a checkmate in 4, so not the easiest thing even for advanced players. That's why I said they should be able to enjoy this video. But the major thing is that you want to recognize the weakened castled king position, and that you see the potential for different pieces to coordinate and come after the king. You may not see the mate right away, but the moves are pretty forcing and straightforward. So even if you didn't see the mate all the way up to here, but you still considered the first two moves, then I would say you got the problem right. Now we're threatening mate, and the only move is to take on g5, and we deliver the goods with queen h5 checkmate. Let's move on to the next one. And as you can see here, we have flipped the board. For our next position, now solving it from black's perspective, a much more complicated position in general than the first one we looked at, but the pattern nevertheless remains the same. We see the knight and bishop and queen all coordinated and in sort of striking positions, we'll say, against the enemy white king. This is what the mating nets patterns are making us more familiar with. It's how these pieces work together. The obvious move here, and if you haven't paused the video, then hurry up and do so, is queen to h4, threatening queen to g3, mate on h2, and of course we're not afraid of this knight ever being captured because of the possibility of checkmate. It's not that simple in a straightforward manner. White can play rook takes e8 in this position, and then the best move by far is the move knight to e2. However, the position is still completely lost after knight f2 check, king h2, and knight takes d3. Knight takes d1 might also be possible, but to win the rook. But even knight takes d3 with the idea of opening up the free knight here, and after knight takes d4, knight takes c1. White is losing a piece, if not more. For example, if rook takes c1, we have queen takes f4 check, and nothing else in the position can do anything but head into an endgame where he's down a piece at best. So, though this one will not necessarily end in a checkmate, as many of the ones throughout this whole video series haven't, but we see that the mating net pattern itself, which is the knight and bishop and queen coordinating well together, is what led to that win of material if white plays the move knight e2, which again is the only way to stop this. In the game, the move that was played was bishop to e2, and after queen to g3, white took with the bishop, but in doing so, opened up the opportunity for another mating net. Taking here is likely also winning for black, but the most direct win is rook e1 check, and after everybody gets captured, the bishop and queen coordinate well together in a very common type of pattern. Bishop checks first, bishop goes back to f2, guarding the escape square. Again, I guess I should point out that queen g1 check right away would allow this move. So the point is, we play bishop check first, then discovered check, improving the bishop, and then we deliver Chekalina Lishlamba on g1. One more time for good measure, just like we see on ESPN, they get instant replays, so why can't we have instant replays as chess players, right? If knight e2, again, we're going to check and take here or here, we're winning material. And if bishop e2, taking with the bishop, does not save the day because of rook to e1 check, of course the Greco mate itself would occur after h takes g4, queen to h4, booyah, in your face. Take that, Stuart Scott, eat your heart out. Next problem. Our next position, also black to play, and like the last one, should be pretty obvious considering that we are now fairly familiar with this pattern. Black plays the winning move, queen to g3, exclamaviach, threatening checkmate on h2. I really like the Greco's mate because it feels like I'm performing surgery with the knight, bishop, and queen against the enemy king, sort of maneuvering my way in with the queen when you don't normally see her act this way, right? So after queen to g3, we're threatening mate. H takes g4, we simply play h takes g4, and the only way to escape the immediate mate is to run with the rook, but all that does is delay the inevitable. One more time, again for instant replay measure, not even blocking the diagonal of the bishop would do anything here because, of course, we're still checkmating on h2. And the game is over, meaning the game is over, red rover, send the white king right over. Next problem. Back to white's perspective, and before I moved on officially to the Blackburn's mate, I wanted to show you an example of the queen and bishop coordinating together, just like I did in our second example when the bishop checked on g1, ended up with a discovered check, which allowed the queen to deliver the goods in the end. If you remember, that was the second problem we did, and if not, you can back up right now and check it out. I realized that in showing you that mating pattern with the queen and bishop, I felt like I have not done that particular pattern justice yet in this video series, so consider that second problem you saw, the first example of the queen and bishop mating net, we're calling it, and like the rest of the puzzles in this particular installment, they are all having to do with the weakened castled position, so that is our theme today. And in this position, we see another example of the queen and bishop coordinating in a very common way, a very obvious and practical pattern to know. And the first move, of course, is rook to g4 check. If the king moves, we can walk away. And if after he takes it, we take on h7, we check with the bishop first, that's the key, so that the bishop can then retreat, unleashing the discovered check and guarding the climax square, which allows the queen to clean up. So again, notice that the key to this queen and bishop pattern, which this will be the last time we see it officially as far as me giving it its due credit, the key to the queen and bishop pattern is just looking at the king's possible escape squares and not allowing that to be so by not feeling like you have to lead with the queen. Here, taking with the queen would just allow the king to run, and white would surely go on to lose this position because he's down a ton of material. But taking with the bishop forces the king to h8, and when we follow that up with a discovered check, not only is it an effective discovered check, but it also guards the critical climax square. Again, just like the last position, or the second one I did, the bishop was guarding the escape square. Here, the bishop is guarding the square that allows the queen to deliver the support mate. Support mate is very simple when the queen is directly affronting the king and she's protected by another piece. Very common checkmate, and that's a support mate for you right there. So that's the queen and bishop mating pattern together. Right now I'd like to move on to Blackburn's mate. It doesn't get as well known, doesn't really get any more well known than the Blackburn's mate. Maybe you didn't know that was the name that belonged to this particular checkmate you're going to see here, but it's a very famous type of sacrifice, and everybody loves a good queen sacrifice, right? Just makes us feel all warm and cozy inside when we've delivered checkmate by giving up our most valuable piece, right? Like we've been transported in time back to the days of Morphy and Anderson, and we just feel like a total BA, right? We're just going to take it home, and everybody loves sacrificing pieces. Sorry I got off on that little tangent there. I just got a little bit excited. So anyway, let's focus on what's in front of us, which is that we want to deliver checkmate to the black king. We recognize that he has a weakened castled position because pawns have advanced and therefore squares are exposed, sticking with the theme of today's video. And white to move. If you haven't paused your video, that's a you problem, not a me problem. Here we go. Queen takes h5, exclamaviagic, sacrificing the queen and threatening checkmate in multiple ways. So blocking the diagonal with the bishop would allow the checkmate here. Capturing the knight on g5 would allow checkmate on h8. So you see that black's choices are pretty limited at this point. He has to take the queen, and we get to deliver checkmate on h7. A very famous, a very exciting, and a very fun way to attack the enemy king. Maybe not as practical as Greco's. Obviously, it's a little bit extravagant, but when you're recognizing that your opponent has a weakened castled position and you have pieces targeting that area of the board, you can give yourself the right to look for these types of patterns, and when you become more familiar with them, you're more likely to actually find them in a game. So, again, this is a really great one to see. Let's see a couple more examples of this Blackburn's mate. First, we'll just see one that is strikingly similar, pretty much exactly the same. We start out with queen takes h5. Obviously, playing g takes h5 is going to allow checkmate on h7. And so, black's only other option is to try to take the knight on g5. Taking with the knight would obviously allow checkmate. So black's only real option in this position is bishop takes g5. And though we don't get to deliver the Blackburn mate in the end with this queen sack and the bishop taking on h7, we see that now we've put ourselves in position to win via another way, a complete destruction of the castle king. Bishop takes g6. If f takes g6, we checkmate in 1. If he makes any other move besides taking the bishop, we'll be taking the knight and giving checkmate here very shortly. So knight f6 may be the only other way to postpone it. We then eliminate the defender and deliver the goods. Hollywood. Right? Check that out again. Blackburn's mate, or at least the pattern as far as recognizing the weakened castled king, starts us off right. And after bishop takes g5, we continue the destruction of the castled king, and the game is over. Black is simply picking his poison. Next problem. Before we walk away from Blackburn's initial mating pattern and the obvious things we've seen, we'll continue with one more obvious example just from black's perspective, because we always likes to mix it up here in my videos. Queen takes h4, threatening checkmate on h1. Once again, if the diagonal is blocked, we deliver the goods on h2. The game is over. Billy Blue. So, nothing complicated here, not as even tricky as the last one where we showed Blackburn's mate lead to the sacrifice of the bishop on g6. Just another very simple one to show you the pattern one more time from a different perspective. What I'd like to do now is actually move on to Blackburn's other mate and what I am calling other fianchettoed checkmate setups. Situations where your opponent has a king that is potentially exposed because of pushing the pawns, just like we've been doing, but particularly fianchetto setup. Sorry I said fianchetto, forgive me, but the fianchetto setup and what's known as Blackburn's other mate trap. So let's move on to that. Let's take a look at this position here. And before we move on to other Phi and Keto mating net. There are only a couple other ones that I would classify outside of this Blackburn's ideas. And again, the names aren't that important. But here we see Blackburn's other mate, as we're calling it. It also has to do with the knights and bishops coordinating around the enemy king. In this situation, it is white to play. And this pattern you're about to see here is a very practical one because I've used it a few times in my own games, and it's something that when you see the power of a discovered attack and you combine it with weaknesses around the enemy king, really a lot of great things are possible. So this particular problem shows that, and White's first move is knight to g4, double exclaim a Viach, little extra emphasis. I'm threatening knight h6 checkmate. And your only way to stop it is to start throwing pieces in the middle of it. But the problem is that I also was opening up the possibility for other things, namely the discovered attack on the rook on e8. So a simple move like h5 to meet knight h6 check with king h7 runs into knight f6 check, and forget about the fact that I can start eating everybody with discovered checks and just, you should be resigning a couple moves ago. The point is that knight g4, even just initially, the fact that I opened up this battery along the e-file, made knight g4 an absolutely devastating move, and I'm going to deliver checkmate on knight h6 after rook takes e3. This particular position, what you see here, is what we refer to when we say the other Blackburn's mate. Let's see another example of it. As I said, the key to this other Blackburn's mate is the power of a discovered attack combined with it. If you simply move the knight to make a direct threat of checkmates in any position, usually a direct threat can be met by something. It's very rare that your opponent can make like a threat of a checkmate in one move and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. And if there is, then probably you've been lost for a long time. In most situations, the threat of a direct checkmate, like 1 and 2 moves, is most powerful when you're combining it with other things like taking advantage of your opponent's undefended pieces, discovered attacks, pinnings, x-rays, interference, anything you can do to combine the threat of winning material along with the checkmate is what makes it work. And in this position, we have no exception. White plays the brilliant knight to d5, double exclam, attacking the queen in 2 ways, but like a discovered or double check, both pieces are hanging. Black could take this knight, and he can take the queen, but neither one is successful. Taking the knight would obviously head into a position where Black should probably resign immediately, being down so much material. And taking the undefended queen either way walks in to knight e7 checkmate. Again, consider Blackburn's other mate. We first saw knight on h6, now we see the knight on e7. But the key thing is that we're taking advantage of an exposed, castled position for our king, and that's why we're able to deliver this checkmate. Remember the theme of the day, exposed, castled position for the enemy king. And that's what we're looking to do. Here we have a discovered attack that is kind of combined with the threat of undefended pieces, and that's what makes Blackburn's other mate most effective. Let's see one more example of this particular pattern. Here we see the idea of a discovered check / battery is pretty obvious because we have the bishop, the knight, and the queen, again, all coordinated together, attacking some particular squares around the enemy king, right? And you have to understand that just recognizing the potential for a tactic is a very good step in your chess progression. You don't always find a concrete win, and of course what we're doing here is making ourselves familiar with the patterns, and it should go without saying that you're not going to get this type of romantic win every chess game you play where you're checkmating your opponent brilliantly in the middle of the board or with a queen sacrifice, right? So before you get too mad at Danny and say, oh, you promised me I was going to get all these checkmate patterns. Okay, that's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is a lot of these tactical patterns, the threat of them by itself is what makes your opponent make other concessions, create other weaknesses, and perhaps get in trouble in other ways. And so you have to see the most simplified version of every pattern before you can understand how it really affects the game on an advanced level. Say that again because it's just a really important concept for chess. You have to know the simplified versions of every pattern before you can really understand how it affects the game on an advanced level. So that's what we're doing here. And in this position, we have another romantic queen sacrifice. Queen takes g7 to end the game after king takes g7, knight to f5, double discovered check. So, of course, Black would like to deal with both those pieces but cannot. And we deliver checkmate on h6. One more time, just so we can say in your face, booyah, ESPN Sports Center line. I always wanted to be a Sports Center anchor, but failed in that dream, and now I'm here on Chess.com. Just kidding. I've always wanted to be on Chess.com, but you know what I mean. Anyway, I probably shouldn't have said that. Let's move on. One final and really simple example of taking advantage of a weakened fianchetto in your opponent's position is what we see here. White to play and win. The idea is queen takes h6, and we're threatening checkmate in 1, and bishop takes h6 is the only way to delay that. Rook takes h6, and there is nothing black can do to see the light of day. Recognize that this is again from a real game, and it's pretty clear that some things must have gone wrong for black, but other criteria in the position would make you think black's okay. He's got the queen and rook active, the bishop on the diagonal, and so without this sort of concrete knowledge of the mating pattern and how potentially dangerous this position is, the game may not be over. But this position is completely lost for black after this awesome sacrifice. So I wouldn't call this this is not Blackburn's mate, this is not Greco's mate. I don't know that it has a particular name, this bishop and rook coordination to deliver, I guess, what would be a back rank checkmate to the enemy king. But I consider a back rank checkmate officially one where the king is trapped by his own pawns. So in any case, what we're seeing here is a weakened fianchetto position, weakened castle position. White can sacrifice, recognize this type of mating pattern, make sure you put it in the little database of knowledge in your head. And let's move on to our next pattern. Now, officially, the name of our next pattern is Lolly's Mate, Lolly's Mate, Lolly's Mate, whatever you want to call it. I think he also had a gambit named after him. And you can see, you'll understand why I classified it and put it in the fourth installment along with Greco's, Blackburn's, and the other weakened castle position mates, because what makes Lolly's Mate is that we have a weakened fianchettoed or castle position for the king, and that the pawn is the key piece taking away the escape square. I think that's sort of the defining factor of Lolly's mating pattern, and of course the same type of pattern would work if we had a knight or a bishop or some other piece guarding that square, the mating pattern we're about to see. But Lolly's Mate in particular is one that works because the enemy king's castle position has been weakened, usually a fianchettoed setup, which is why it classifies so well with the other mating patterns we've already done. And here we see the pawn doing a big person's job, right? He's a big boy now, guarding g7. White plays the move queen takes h7 check, king takes h7, rook to h3 check, followed by checkmate in one move. Notice that making a direct threat of checkmate is always nice, and if you don't have to sacrifice pieces, we don't ever really want to, but in some cases you have no choice but to be as forcing as possible, as here we would run into checkmate in 1. So knowledge of how effective this pawn can be when it's controlling the escape square for an enemy king, really important, and this example of Lolly's Mate is a famous one, pretty simple one. Hope you enjoy. Next problem. Also classified under Lolly's Mate is not just where the pawn acts as the piece cutting off a king's escape route, allowing for a queen sacrifice as we saw in the last position, but Lolly's Mate and that name is really reserved just in general for the pawn when it's serving a purpose of attacking the weakened castle king's position, right? So in this situation, the last situation, it was taking away squares. This situation is providing support so that white can perform another act of bravery and send his rook into the fire, attacking the rook on g8 and the king, of course, and by the way, immediately threatening queen to g7, which is checkmate 1 because the rook is pinned. And so whether black decides to take on g8 or make any other move, we are delivering checkmate in 1 because Lolly's pawn, which has extended itself so far, is helping us to look brilliant, right? So be aware of this pattern, and again, just classifies well with what we've been looking at. Not the most practical one, but is something that will occur whenever you have a pawn extended this far against a weakened king. The final example of Lolly's Mate that I will give was one that I debated about whether it was really should be classified under Lolly's Mate. Almost put it under the smothered and semi-smothered type of checkmates that we covered actually in the first mating net patterns addition to this video series. But I did decide to go with it under Lolly's Mate because it does have the same type of theme, which is that the pawn is extended, attacking the weakened castle king position, and allowing us to do amazing things because of it. So I did decide that even though maybe other people don't feel like it's even a debate, that it is Lolly's Mate. To me, the climax of the checkmate pattern is just as important for classifying it as is the beginning, in my opinion. So the climax of this one is sort of a smothered and semi-smothered mate, potentially, but it is something we're going to classify under Lolly's here, with black to play and win. If you want to pause your clocks, you can do so. Black plays the move knight to f6, and now our obvious threat of knight to g4 and checkmate on h2 is pretty darn hard to stop. with the g2 square being taken away. So the most obvious thing for white to do is to try to remove the queen from its powerful post. Hopefully black will be a dummy and trade queens and head to an endgame down a piece. But of course, we're aware of Lolly's mate and the powerful tactics that potentially exist, so we're not going to do that. We play knight to g4, threatening checkmate in 1 on h2, and after queen takes h3, knight takes f2 is a semi-smothered mate. Remember, it's not officially ever a smothered mate unless the king is immediately surrounded by his own pieces and completely trapped. In this case, the king is not completely smothered because our pawn is actually doing some of the trapping, so it's actually more often referred to as a semi-smothered mate. But the names don't necessarily matter. What matters here is that you recognize the potential of danger, you see these patterns, and you become familiar with them. Sometimes people might decline a move like this for fear of seeing, oh, there's a queen trade coming. But when you see this type of tactic is possible, that becomes a really powerful tool. Noted should be that after knight f6, queen takes f3 would actually allow white to give up material, but really would not save white from losing the game. After knight to g4, if queen to g2, there's several things, but knight takes f2 check, followed by rook takes f2, should be sufficient. And if white decides that he wants to give up the queen to delay the game for a while, he can do so, but of course this position is just completely lost. So that was our last example of Lolly's mate, and now I'd like to move on to some examples that also include pawns, but don't necessarily fall under Lolly's mate. But when I saw a transition we were doing when I was preparing this series, we were starting with, Grecos and Blackbourns and weak fianchetto patterns that all kind of exist within each other and help us take advantage of a weakened castled king. And then when we added this Lolly's mate in there, we see examples of when a pawn is helping out for mating nets. So I decided we would end this video with a few examples of pawn mating patterns, including Anderson's mating pattern and other examples where a pawn is on the 7th rank and helping us to deliver a checkmate. So let's finish the video with a few of those. The first one is a ton of fun. Uh-oh. Here I go again with the rhymes. Let's not do that, okay? Our first position here is an instructive one because it's not an impractical one. There are many times when a pawn storm that you can conduct against your opponent can lead you to having an advanced pawn. That's why looking at something like Lolly's mate for the last few examples is really instructive and practical. And even this one here with a pawn on the 7th rank, as extreme as it seems, is a practical one because, like I said, when you conduct pawn storms and attack your opponent's king, sometimes you end up taking a few pawns along the way and putting yourself in position for mating patterns like this to exist. Let's do this thing. Queen takes h7, king takes h7, rook h5, Chekalina Lashlamba, Chekalina I rock ya, and after you take, I take, and shake and bake. Shake and bake, and I helped. That's Magic Man, Holmes. And from black's perspective, there is nothing he can do to stop that. It was a forced mate from the beginning. Let's do another one of those. Here we see another great one that is obviously practical whenever we've attacked the king and gotten a pawn extended far. Not exactly ending the same way the last one did, but similar in that we end up making a sacrifice in order to force through a promotion with devastating results. The first move is, ding, 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 of course you found it, queen takes h7, booyah, exclamaviach. King has to take it unless he wants to get rocked in this way. I guess it's his choice at this point. But after king takes h7, we get a queenie poo, king moves, queen to g6 is, I guess, the most simple way to end the game. Again, one more time for good measure. Slam bam, thank you ma'am. Finally, to bring our journey here, our weekend journey of mating pet. Did I really just say mating pet? Wow. Way to go, Danny. Have a little more coffee, will you? Our amazing and incredible journey, the greatest adventure of mating net patterns, comes to a close this weekend with two examples from black's perspective. Wow, it took a lot of energy for me to get that last sentence out. After bishop h2 check, king takes h2, g1 queen, fat lady sings. Let's do that again. Bishop h2 check, we promote, and the fat lady sings. I like using that term whenever the queen is the one delivering the checkmate, because I literally consider the queen a fat lady. Can't ever get that queen from Alice in Wonderland, the cartoon, out of my head. Anyway, that was random. The point here, again, is recognizing the extended pawn, doing whatever it takes when you have a pawn advance that far to queen it is usually a good idea, because mating nets are... When you have a mating net, they're worthy of every move to be considered, because if checkmate is on the line, you should be able to sacrifice anything if you can actually get what you want. So in this position, it's pretty clear deflection tactic. We're just removing the king away from where he's at right now and delivering the goods. let's do one more of these. And on our last one, if you can't solve this one after the last few we did, then I'm worried about you. Really, I'm worried about you. Why don't you go ahead and send me a message, and we'll talk. We'll dive into your childhood, and we'll rehash some issues and really get you feeling more on the right track and a little bit better about yourself, right? Anyway, just kidding. But of course, you should be able to solve this one. The very similar sort of pattern from Black's perspective. We have an extended pawn, and Black simply sacrifices the queen, brings the other rook over. Running with the king will allow us to queen right away, and I'm sure that checkmate follows. That looks pretty good to me. And of course, escaping or trying to maintain his blockading square only makes matters worse and gets checkmate in one move rather than two. Pretty fun to see how well the rook and bishop tend to coordinate with an advanced pawn. Notice that almost all the mating net patterns we did today with the extended pawn tended to involve the rook and bishop. So that was an interesting thing that I noticed, and hopefully you did as well. And so that brings our weekend featured video to a close here. Hope you are excited, looking forward to April Fool's Day. Maybe you're watching this on Sunday, so it already is April Fool's Day. I bet you know who likes April Fool's Day. Yeah, this guy. That's right. All right, everybody. We'll see you around.